like to welcome each and every individual to Voices of Integrity with police officers and law enforcement. And today is going to be one of those topics that hope it's not offensive, to anyone. And so I think it's important to share, like, the three individuals that are hosting this podcast have a lot of respect for police officers. We know that, most police officers are going to be really good. They put their lives on the line, every day for total strangers. I had a cousin that, that was married, had a little one, his wife was pregnant, and he died, in the line of duty. So I have tremendous respect, for police officers. And so anytime there's something that might be construed as negative about police officers, I don't know. I just have to be really, really careful about that. So, if you're a little sensitive, if you're in law enforcement or police officer and you're a little sensitive about it, with all the wacky stuff that's been going on, I get it. I mean, I don't, obviously, because I'm not out there every day putting my life on the line for other people, total strangers, and people who want to harm me or kill me or whatever. So I don't understand. And so I want to have that on the upfront. There's two other groups that will be sharing, connecting together. Do not think of this as a negative thing, okay? Like, when we're compared to somebody else and we respond in a way that, like we get angry, about being compared to them, we have negative thoughts about these other people. So this title of this one is Police, Pastors, and Politicians. So if you're a police officer and you have negative you have, like, I can't believe I'm being compared to a pastor or when compared to a politician. The reason you don't think a lot of pastors and politicians, okay? If you're a politician and you don't like being compared to police or pastors, well, then you have negative impression of, police and politicians, or police and pastors. So, but there's commonality between the three that is very intriguing. Like, it's very interesting if you go ahead and actually think about it. So anytime there's a group of people, how do you know when somebody's over-identifying with a group of people? My experience, it's when they get angry when somebody says something about that group of people. So my dad, if you guys hadn't been part of some of the other podcasts, my dad was a pastor. So raised, very, very conservative Baptist, very conservative Christian. And so when people say things about Christians, what's my response to that? Right? Like, if I'm defensive, somebody say Christians are hypocritical, Christians are mean. There's, a bunch of pastors and priests and stuff that abuse girls and boys. If I go ahead and get defensive about any group of people I'm involved with, maybe I'm over-identifying with that group. And that may be maybe I'm a part of the problem in the group. And so a pastor once said to me, we're like police officers, we clean up other people's messes. Now, because my dad was a pastor, I've been trained from a very little boy, you don't ask pastors hard questions. Just saying, don't do it. Now, if you're a pastor and you're taking offense at that, thank you for validating my point of maybe over-identifying as a pastor. If you're a pastor's wife and you're really ticked at me, well, you might over-identify with a group of pastors than your husband, or wife, depending on what it is, your spouse. And so when we look at groups of people, there's always good and bad in every group, right? Yeah. In every group of people, there's always good, there's always bad. There just are. And so groups of people, it's interesting when you say anything about a group of people, when you say, I mean, politicians are different, don't get me wrong. Like they're just used to, they're just used to everybody bashing them. So they're just used to it. Pastors, not. They're not used to being, criticized. And if you're a pastor, you're like, you don't understand. I, as a pastor's kid, trust me, I grew up in a pastor's home, and my dad, he got criticized some, but mostly not so much. Yeah, not so much. Well,
So
why? Go ahead.
what would be the downside or the negative side of over identifying with a certain group of people?
Sure. So what happens is when you over-identify with a group of people, you train everybody not to say anything that you would construe as being negative about that group. Like any church I go to, my wife understands it, and all my family understand it. Don't have Mark ask the pastor any questions. I can't ask pastors any questions. Just can't, because they're going to get mad at me. They just will. They don't have a conversation. They don't do it. So what we're doing is we get defensive about a group of people. When we over-identify, we don't go ahead and own that we're a part of the group. Like we want to get all the benefits of being part of that group. Like for police officers, it's like people respect us, revere us, they honor us. When we go into restaurants, they give us free food. Like they treat us really good. They really do.
Mm-hmm.
The community really, really treats us good. People do. Not all the time, not every time, but most of the time they do. It has been my experience with most police officers. And so when we're not willing to look at, like if somebody goes ahead and says, pastors go ahead and sexually abuse, kids, I'm not stupid. I understand they're not saying 100% of the pastors doing it 100% of the time. What they're saying is there's some pastors that sexually abuse children. And that's true. I don't have to say, you can't say that. It's not all pastors. I didn't say all pastors, didn't say it all the time. So what happens, Kenny, is that it just creates or it just makes us look weak as police. Just does. Or makes us look, weak as pastors. And it makes us look weak as politicians. There's a whole bunch of similar characteristics. So there's a protection of your own. So have you ever thought, this is where, questions get a little like, I'm not saying you're like this. I'm not saying all pastors or police or politicians. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying, like, can people ask groups of police officers, groups of politicians, groups of pastors? Can you ask a group of pastors? Can you ask a group of police officers, do you think you're entitled, self-righteous, and victims? Can somebody ask you that question? More likely than not, people aren't asking groups of people that way. So as a group, there's a great Bonhoeffer's Law of Stupidity. Great video. Maybe I'll get posted with this post. I don't know. But it's great where groups of people come together. Anytime you have a group of people coming together, that group is vulnerable. So you have a group of pastors coming together. You have a group of police coming together. You have a group of politicians coming together. Anytime you have a group of people coming together, they become vulnerable because they see things in a similar light. Not all the time, every time. I'm just saying overall big picture. And so what happens is we don't self-police ourselves. In my dad being a pastor, there's a pandemic of sexual abuse that's happened not only in the Catholic Church, but also in the Baptist church that I was raised in. My dad was raised, he was GRBC, General Association of Regular Baptist Churches, like his whole life. That's how I was raised. And the GRBC they won't address sexual abuse. They just won't. They will not do it. Like there's things that have happened in their churches and they ignore it. They won't even return. They put their head in the sand. And it's like, and will any of the other, like any pastors that are on this podcast, will they go and talk to somebody and say, you might want to look at this podcast because you guys are, the GRBC, call them out. It's how I was raised. Like, you know what? And so what we do is we turn a blind eye to other people in our group and say, well, you don't understand. There was a police officer and his wife that I got introduced to do some marriage, help with them. And this police officer, he threw things in the room that blew, that broke up and hit his wife. And there were other police officers that were aware of this and they wouldn't confront him. Well, you need to understand the pressures there's always a reason, right? There's always a reason why a pastor does something or a police officer does something or a politician does something. So in the group, they rationalize it together and they don't address it. And it just gets worse and worse and worse until all of a sudden everything blows up. And then the group becomes a victim. Like we're entitled not to go ahead and call out our own. And what the groups do is all the groups will push out. If you have a police officer that won't protect their own, that police officer gets pushed out. They don't get promoted. There's a whole bunch of stuff. And so they teach their own. Don't go ahead and address stuff in their own. Same thing is true with pastors. Same exact thing. So what you do is you push out the strong in a group that are willing to confront the group, because the greatest threat to the group from the group's perspective is people from within the group. So white males, Christian white males over 50, I am their greatest threat. Why? Because I'm a Christian white male over 50 and I know what goes on. And so I'm the biggest threat to the Christian white male over 50, because you know what? I'm going to call it out. And so what you do is you push those people out of a group. You ignore them. Mm-hmm. You try to go ahead and, do not allow them to speak. Do not allow them to get a voice, because if they get a voice, it's going to expose what's in there. And what's sad is those three, it's crumbling at the foundation. It's crumbling at the foundation. And they struggle. Like, what's the antidote for being entitled, being thankful? Like if I was called to be a police officer, guess what? You know what? Like, I'm not entitled to free meals. I'm not entitled to certain behavior. I'm thankful. I'm grateful. I'm appreciative of that. But thankfulness is an inoculation against entitlement. Because we can all, when we come together as pastors, police officers, and politicians, we come together and we can share how tough our lives are. Self-righteousness, like we're out there, especially police, especially police, and especially pastors. Politicians, it's hard for them to get self-righteous, but some might, I don't know. And so, but we're doing good things, and so it's easy. What's the inoculation for self-righteousness? It's humility. And victimhood, it's like it's easy to go ahead and become a victim. Well, people are mistreating us. They don't respect us as pastors, or they don't respect us as police officers. Why? Is it because we're not dealing with the stuff in our own group? Can we take ownership for ourselves? Like when somebody says something about Christian white males over 50, don't get defensive. I'm like, don't even get me going on it. So again, a little controversial, maybe. Don't take offense to it. Like, have honest conversations. Like, what was this podcast about? And how much truth is there? There's some amount of truth. Like, share this with other people. A lot of police officers go ahead and no pastors. A lot of pastors know police officers. It's interesting, isn't it? And sad, where they're actually partnering up, which is good. I get it. And they're parking police officers in the churches. Another maybe part 2 on this. Like, why is it that people are attacking the churches? Like, maybe there's something that as pastors, maybe we're not doing the things we need to do. Same thing with police and same thing with politicians. So anyways, you have any questions on this, connect with the individual who invited you to participate. Don't be a spectator. Like, don't be a spectator in this podcast. Get involved. And how do you do that? It's pretty simple. You just go on and the Life GPS. There's a mobile app for a nonprofit organization, great organization. There's no cost. Takes a minute or 2 to register for it. As soon as you register for this, you'll be introduced to somebody else in the podcast community. It could be somebody in law enforcement, or somebody cares a lot about law enforcement, somebody wants to help, somebody, that can get to help you get the very most out of this podcast. And always remember, we can accomplish so much more together than we ever could on our own. Have an amazing day. Bye-bye.